Oh yeah, while I'm here, when you first open FL Studio, if you go onto your mixer, oh, I think I've actually set it as to be by default to not do this anymore, so that's why it's not here. But here you should see a fruity limiter. I would personally advise you get rid of that, just whenever. Basically, what all that does is on these volume things, it makes sure your volume never goes into the red, which probably to you sounds, oh, that's great. But here's the thing, it's not great because it makes it so all your stuff sounds flat. If you feel like all your music you make just sounds really flat and dull, no matter how exciting you try to make it sound, it's probably because you've not been getting rid of that fruity limiter. Just be careful about your volume, because there's obviously, if it goes into the red, it will start to sound unpleasant. You want it to just dip its toes into the red and, you know, come in and out of it. Depends on the kind of music you make. Sometimes it can be consistently just a little bit in the red and it's fine. But yeah, just I think it's better to do it that way, because I know that they do that for, oh, if you're a newer person and you don't know about this yet, then this will help you not make terrible sounding tracks because they're all way too loud. But in my opinion, that's worse than just not having it, because if you don't have it, at least you learn from your mistakes. If you do have it, then you learn to make those mistakes and have that just clean it up and also ruin your track, the way your track sounds while you're at it. I don't advise that. Anyway, then there's Flex. I'm not really even going to open Flex because I'm not going to lie, Flex is not my area of expertise. But basically, from what I gather, it's something that you use where you can put a bunch of samples or pre-made kind of sounds in there and go through them, or you can buy online packs where they have a bunch of pre-made sounds. Yeah, I don't use those things. I make all my own sounds. I don't like to use pre-made stuff, so unless it's stuff where I want it to be a real, like a replication of a real life thing, like with those orchestral sounds, I almost always make my own stuff. So because of that, I can't really advise and give you advice there. I mean, I imagine if that's the kind of thing you want, it's probably decent. It seems quite high quality. If that's not the thing you want, then yeah, just avoid it. So this is FPC. This is basically a better drum axe in my opinion. I think these, while they aren't super powerful, just generally sound quite a lot better than the samples you get with drum axe. You can kind of make a bit more of a interesting beat in my opinion. So that's kind of what you're getting there. I'm pretty sure, in fact, all the presets of this are like pre-made loops, and I rarely use these because, again, I don't like to use stuff that's pre-made and all that, but I must admit, some of these are really good. And Interstellar is actually, I think I picked one of these jazz grooves and I just used those. It wouldn't have been that one, obviously. I think it was the jazz ones. But these are actually some pretty good drum loops overall. So if you did want a more realistic sounding drum kit thing with some good loops that come with it, there you go. Then there's Fruitkick, which is trash. Yeah, that's it. Fruitkick is a plugin that is supposed to, well, be a kick drum, and I guess it is. That's what it sounds like. They usually sound more high pitched towards the start and low pitched towards the end, and you can make the pitch when it starts higher and the pitch towards the end lower. But then it just sounds like an annoying laser sound effect. And if you really want it to be annoying, you can make it so it takes really long for it to go from the high frequency to the low one. amplitude decay, I'm just gonna guess that's like volume going down as the note is held. And click. Let me. That click is the little. Well, you can probably hear it. And then there's distortion. It tends to sound very bad. I know that inbuilt distortion is usually not as good as the kind of distortion that I use, but this just sounds so bad to me. This distortion sounds so bad. So yeah, I wouldn't use Fruit Kick. I would just use a kick drum instead of using that. Then there's Fruity Dance. Fruity Dance does nothing. Well, it does this. You get a little FL Studio's little weird anime mascot, and you can get him to dance. Yeah, that's basically it. That's all there is here. It doesn't make any sound or anything. I don't know why it's there. It just is. Then there's Fruity Drum Synth Live. I must admit, this sounds really bad. We're kind of a lot of the bad ones are towards the start. But yeah, this is just another FPC basically. Only to be fair, this one has a lot of samples, like a ridiculous amount. That would be 9 times 12, so that would be 108 samples. I was trying to, so it makes these samples apparently by taking white noise and just filtering it very specifically until it eventually sounds like that, like these percussion things. But I was trying to figure out if there was more to this, but this is just one of those things. I read the manual and I think I understood it, but then as I kept trying to tweak knobs and all that and see what was happening, I just heard that I was making absolutely no difference. So I'm not gonna lie, I'm not the most knowledgeable on this, but it seems like it's just another kind of FPC. Nothing about it makes me really think, cool, this is better than this one. It's not like Drum Pad, which had the whole simulating thing. As I say, I'm pretty sure it's just white noise and they use mathematics and filters to make it so that it sounds like the sounds instead of just like white noise. So yeah. And there's Fruity DX10, which is a bit of a weird one. I couldn't really wrap my head around this one for a bit. It was one of those synths that I ignored for a long time, and then I realised, like, a little bit later, wow, I've actually never used this. What is this? And I started using it. I was like, okay, I'm a bit interested, and I tried to learn how to use it, but I just couldn't. And I've come back to it now, a lot later, and I now understand how it works, and it's not bad, but just every other synth is better. Well, I say every other. A good amount of the synths are better, so I don't know why you would use it, really. What this basically is a subtractive synthesizer. This is what it sounds like when you first open it up. But if I remove all this... There we go. What we now have is a sine wave. So yeah, this is a sine wave. You can turn this waveform knob to turn it into a... Well, I think it's a low-pass saw wave. I think it's a saw wave with some higher frequencies missing. But yeah, basically still a still a saw wave. Just, you know, higher frequencies are gone. That's all this is. Of course, it's just changing the pitch. Or the octaves. I don't think it actually goes into pitch. I think it's just octaves. And this is just vibrato. The LFO rate is just the speed of the vibrato. This is attack, decay, and release. The attack is the time it takes to fade in. The decay is how much time it takes to fade out. And then it will stay at this point. Wait, shouldn't there be a sustain? I guess not. It will stay at that point of volume, and as long as you're holding the note. And then when you let go, the release decides how long it takes for it to go from the volume it was to 0 after you've let go. If I set this to full, I let go a bit ago, and it's still going. There would also usually be a sustain knob which would control how high the volume for this was, and you could obviously have it so the volume was 0, so that even if you kept holding the note, it would not keep playing. It would be at 0 volume anyway, and you know, it'd be done. So the way that this sound gets its sound, where it kind of is made to replicate bells and stuff like that, and you know, real life sounds. The way that it gets that is I mentioned earlier about a thing called frequency modulation, where you take what would be the volume of a sound wave and instead apply that to be something that changes the frequency of a wave, so that when that wave goes up, the frequency of the wave you're changing goes up, and when it goes down, the frequency of the wave you're changing goes down. Basically, these other two parts over here are for two different oscillators that are both frequency modulating the one we started with. I'm actually not sure if the second one is frequency modulating the first one, which is modulating this, or if it's just this is frequency modulation this, and this is also frequency modulating this. I'm not sure which way around it goes, but yeah, that's basically what this is doing. Now, to be fair, you can create a lot with just sine waves, saw waves, even if it is weird low-pass saw waves, and frequency modulators, but even then, like, there are just synths that can do that and more, and in a more easy and intuitive way. So, I don't know why you would use this. The idea of the synth was apparently to replicate kind of 80s synths and all that, and I suppose it does that, but like there are synths that can do that and do more, and this does not do more. Then there's Fruity Envelope Controller. I don't know why it's listed here as one of the generators. This is more like an effect. Essentially, what this does is it's nothing to do with playing notes. You can give it an input, and it can give you a different kind of output. It's kind of hard to explain. So if I press a note with this, it will go through this envelope, and I can then, if I click this continuous output thing, I can then say, hey, the volume of this snare, link it to a controller. I think I can do it. Articulate a 1, because there's different things you can do for this when we're on 1. As you can see now, the snare's volume is matched up to this envelope. And you can do it for this, like, you can map it to like the notes you're pressing and stuff like that, and the velocity of the notes and stuff like that. It's very convoluted and not very useful overall. It can be useful when you use it with Patcher. Basically, do not worry about it. It's one of those things, it's going to become more useful later when you're doing much more advanced stuff, where you're combining multiple synths together and you're wanting the output of one synth to affect a completely different synth, one of their parameters. Once you get to the point where you actually are concerned about doing that, you'll want to learn about Envelope Controller, but for now, just ignore that. It's more like an effect than an actual kind of generator. I don't know why it's listed here. So then there's Fruity Granulizer. Oh, hey, look, it's another kind of very bad-looking, low-quality-looking plugin with a simple interface and with a bunch of ambiguous knobs that don't really explain themselves very well, even after it's been updated to at least tell us here to put a sample in here. Wow, I'm sure this will be terrible. Hey, actually, this one's good. It's not very... Okay, what it does is very good. I wouldn't say it's very well made, just in terms of being intuitive and being easy to use. It's a bit difficult to use, but this is actually a very powerful synth. This is a granular synthesizer, which is something that you don't see as often. This is one of the kind of rarer types of synthesis. If I put in this sample, and now I press a note, well, it's playing the sample, and it's pitching it to whatever note I'm pressing. But yeah, why would I want that? Well, first of all, let me just trim this sample a bit so it sounds a bit better. Where this gets interesting is where you actually start tweaking with some of these knobs at the top. Because a granular synthesizer is different to all these other things that we've been using before. When there's been other things where we put a sample in and it plays it back, pitched to whatever note we play, it's usually just been samplers. They just play back exactly what we put in, or maybe put a bit of effects on it. Granular synthesizers are much more interesting. They have actually split this sound now into millions and millions of tiny milliseconds of the sound called grains. And it plays all those grains in order, and with like a certain gap in between them, but by default the gap and all that kind of stuff is made so that it sounds like it's normal when you play it together. The only thing that you can hear that's different is that when it loops round and plays the sound again, the initial hit isn't as strong because each of the grains is set to have a fade in and fade out time, which is the length of that time is defined by how high this knob is. So by default, it's 40 milliseconds, and the hold time is how long it holds in that grain before it starts to fade out. So yeah, that's how it'll sound normally, and it will sound hardly like anything's changed. But then when you start to mess with it, okay, now it's starting to sound a little bit different. What if we change the wave spacing? Well, that sounds interesting. What's basically happening here is, if I remember right, basically all the grains, when they cut them up, they obviously make it so there's different parts of the sample, but it doesn't have to do that. When you change the wave spacing, you make it so that each next grain doesn't necessarily start where the last one ended. It'll start where the last one ended if you use 100% grain spacing, which is what it is by default. However, if you use 50% grain spacing, the next grain will start halfway through where the first grain, the grain before it was. Like, it'll start from halfway through the grain before, which will mean that the result of that is it will take 1.5 times longer for the same sound to play. It will sound a little bit different because, of course, we're kind of overlapping. We're playing the same kind of parts more than once now, but it's also a little bit subtle. So this is how we make it so that if we want to change the amount of time it takes for a sound to play, but we don't want to change its pitch, you would do it by granular synthesis. And then if you set it to 0, we can just have it play the same initial part over and over, which sounds like a computer dying. Oh well. There we go. Right, okay, so yeah, that's that. If you put it into reverse, if you have it as a minus number, it will play them in reverse order. So it doesn't actually necessarily reverse the sample. It will sound a teeny bit different than just reversing the sample. It will play the grains in the right order. They'll still go from start to finish, but the order of the grains is opposite. But that doesn't matter much because, again, the grain notes are only milliseconds long. So, it sounds very similar to having it reversed. So yeah. So yeah, then there's the grain spacing, which will actually determine how long it is until you place the next grain. So when it's at 100%, as soon as one grain ends, the next grain starts. However, you can put it at lower settings so that they actually overlap, and that will sound very interesting. Or you can put it over 100% so that there are gaps where there are no grains playing for a few milliseconds. So yeah, this can get pretty interesting. Oh. Yeah, I love this stuff. This is so good for getting experimental and weird sounds. And it's a bit more advanced, but if any of you want some ideas for some cool sound design, try and just go crazy with a sample in here, and then use that as a modulator with Vocodex. If you don't know what I'm on about, don't worry about it for now. So yeah, granular synthesis is pretty cool. It can be used for dubstep kind of screams, and it can also be used for atmospheric kind of pads. Well, not really pads, but just kind of setting an atmosphere. If you add a lot of convolution or just reverb onto this, and a lot of effects, you can really make this kind of set a mood. So yeah, and just feel free to use whatever you want. I suppose I'll try it with some vocals. I don't usually use vocals, but I know that a lot of people probably do that. Okay, let's get the grain spacing back to normal. Let me get this to 150 exactly. It's nagging me. I actually can't. Oh, I just skipped it. Oh, that's so annoying. You could use that for some atmospheric stuff. In fact, yeah, let me just try and add a big wet reverb to that, just to prove my point. Where's Convolver? There it is. Can I do it? There we go. Doesn't even sound like the original sound anymore. It sounds like it's not even a voice, which is obviously kind of what's intended. So yeah, Granulaizer is actually pretty good, contrary to what you were probably expecting, because I won't blame you. It doesn't look very good, but it's pretty powerful. You do really have to kind of get used to using it though, because it doesn't really hold your hand. Do you know what? I'm moving on. I haven't even talked about everything here. Let me actually go back and talk a bit more. So transients will be. Is there a drum? I'm pretty sure they have drum loops in here, don't they? I never really used them. Oh, maybe they don't. Hang on, let me go into a user. I guess the trash. Did I keep the drum loops or did I get rid of them? Because I never really use them. Yeah, there we go. If I put this in, this transients thing should detect when the hits are. Yeah, as you can see by all these little markers, it now knows where all of them are. So what I think this will do is we can make it so that it will stop at each transient. You can see it kind of jitter around when it gets to the transients. What you can also do is, if we just replace this with a new one again, is with these effects things, first of all you can pan. What that will do is it will make it switch between the left and right ear with each grain. There's also randomness. I wouldn't recommend using this too much, but basically it will make it so that the part of the sample that we use for each grain is just random. But the main attraction here, although it's very awkward and I wish it was more customizable, is the depth and the speed thing here, which is very vague, but essentially when you turn up this depth thing, if I make this speed, you can see it starts to go backwards, and then forwards, and then backwards, and then forwards. And the speed changes how fast it switches between them. It's always slowly moving forwards because I've got this wave spacing moving forwards, but if I set it to 0... So yeah, now that's everything about this. All this time thing is where the sample starts from. You can have it key to pitch, or you can have it so the pitching is all weird. Just a minute. Can I use a better sample? Oh no, that. If I say pitch, you can hear that I'm playing the notes, but if I go on transient mode, it sounds like the same note even though it isn't. I don't know all the details, but basically there's different ways of making the note you're playing change how the sound sounds. And technically they all, I think, technically have their ways that they're correcting the pitch, but typically the default one is the best for making it sound like it's pitched to the note you're playing. Then there's Fruity Keyboard Controller. I don't even remember this one. Oh, you can it's like Envelope Controller, don't bother with it yet. You can basically use this to kind of use it as a different kind of output for different notes, and then send that output to another knob on some other synth, and so the knob position of that on that synth will change depending on what note you give it. Again, it's something you should probably not worry about really at this point. Fruity Slicer, if I remember right, this is, do not use this. This is essentially used for if you put like a drum loop in, it's supposed to cut it up so that it will give you each individual kind of bit of percussion that makes up the drum loop. Like it will give you the snare, it'll give you the kick, it'll give you the hat. And when you play certain notes, you can play different parts of the sample. So you can play the bit where the snare is, the bit where the hat is, or the bit where the kick is. But there's another synth, or one I find that a very niche and probably something that I would never really use kind of thing. And second, there's another synth here called SliceX, which is just this but better and more updated, so don't use it. Fruity Video Player, you give it a video file and it plays it. That's it. I don't know why it's here, it just is. FLEX-FruityVoltageController. Yep, when you get this, you know things aren't going to be great. So, from what I understand, because I read the manual for this thing and I did briefly use it, just messing around with it, trying to figure out what was going on. From what I understand with that thing, it's not anything you'll need to use. I think from what the manual was saying, it seemed to be that it's made specifically for if you have old equipment which doesn't take a certain type of electrical output, or is weird with how it works with like newer technology. You can use that to make it more compatible and send this older equipment signal. From what I can tell, it's literally useless to use it inside FL Studio unless you've got some kind of device attached to it, and it's to control devices that you attach to FL Studio. Don't worry about anything else. The only thing that it can do is just make it so this line goes from here to there. Or there. It moves the line, which is just a constant. It's a constant volume, which you'd think would sound terrible, but it doesn't really, because since the line isn't moving, it has a frequency of 0 technically, so it's so low pitch we can't hear it, even though technically it's super loud. You'll only hear a click, a kind of annoying little clicky sound when it snaps from middle to the top. If you put it to the top, because obviously then it's moved, but once it stopped moving, you'll just kind of stop hearing it. Anyway,